Today's point of view will discuss how religion has caused violence, conflict and wars over the years. The point of view will mainly cover Europe and the Middle East and a little bit of Southeast Asia, but nothing on the Americas, as religion over there has not caused wars or conflicts, although there has been some violence. Starting with Europe, in 711 the Berbers conquered Spain, and it would be 700 years before Spain, or the Christian part of Spain, threw out the Muslim Berbers and returned it to a Catholic country. Strictly speaking, the Berbers took over the Iberian Peninsula, as Portugal did not exist at that time. After El Cid threw out the Berbers and the Muslims, the next thing that came along in that part of the world was the Spanish Inquisition. Now, the Spanish Inquisition wanted to turn everybody into Catholics, and as such they concentrated on the Jewish population, and they forced them by force, by promising them death or torture, that they had to change from being Jewish into being Christians, and especially Catholics. They also did this with any of the Muslim population that was existing at that time. Much good came from the Berbers in the fact that they introduced mathematics and astronomy and education into the Iberian Peninsula, but this took no account when the Inquisitors wanted to change everybody into Catholics. In the 16th and the 17th century, Protestantism was gaining a foothold throughout a lot of Europe. However, the Romance kingdoms of Italy, Spain, etc. remained firmly Catholic and wanted then to go to war with those countries that were becoming Protestant. There was an alliance of Britain, as it was at that time, or England more specifically, the Netherlands or the Dutch, the Belgians and the Germans all wanted to have Protestantism as the major religion, and in fact in England it was decreed by the Houses of Parliament that any king or queen of England must be a Protestant. So in those days there were various wars that were taking place. Many people were killed before peace was restored and religious equality gained ground. Modern day Europe does not see religious zealotry in the same light. However, there is no doubt about it that anti-Muslim sentiment and feeling, thanks mainly due to things that have been happening in the Middle East, has caused problems within various communities. Muslims themselves, coming from Muslim countries, have also tried to impose their way of life upon those European nations which have their own way of life. This again has caused problems, and in many cases has caused violence, and there doesn't seem to be any answer to it at this point in time. Of all the religious wars and violence to date throughout the ages, nothing can compare with the pogroms from Russia from 1917 till the early 50s, and obviously from Germany from 1939 to 1945. The number of people wrong, the number of Jews that were killed during the German war was estimated at more than 6 million. On top of this, the Russian pogroms, there is no exact figure, but it could be anything up to 5 or 6 million also. That almost decimated the Jewish population of the world, and to try and escape this, Jews from Russia, from Germany, from the allies of Germany, tried to escape to England, Europe that was not under German rule, and of course America. Even today, with Jewish people being spread amongst Europe and America, and obviously Israel, there is still an awful lot of animosity from certain groups of people about the Jews. How and when this will ever be changed, I cannot tell. Obviously, in the next section, when we move to the Middle East, there will be a lot more on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but up till now, that is the end of the European part of this broadcast. Before going on to the Middle East in general, which brings its own set of prejudice, I'd like to talk about the big three, which is basically Russia, China and India. Russia has a prejudice not just against Islam, but basically against anybody that doesn't seem to fit in with the stereotype of a Nordic kind of person. In other words, Western facial features. And Russians themselves can be very prejudicial against anybody that doesn't fit into this. Russia, because of its connections with the old USSR, had many Muslim kind of countries like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan and so on. And I've always thought that part of the reasons that they divested themselves when they got rid of the old USSR was because of these kind of prejudices. China, on the other hand, is definitely against any Muslim community, mostly against the Urumqi community in the northwest of northwest of China. I think this is mainly because China would like to have the communist perspective of no religions. But as we all know, Muslims themselves can be very fanatical on following their religion, and consequently this goes against the Chinese government. The third one is very, very complex, and that is India. Back in 1947, when Pakistan and India divided, the amount of deaths on both sides because of that divide, because of Muslims against Hindus, Hindus against Muslims, etc. It actually split up the whole of India into what was Pakistan, what became Pakistan, and eventually became Pakistan and Bengal. Inside India now there are still hundreds of thousands of Muslims, and from time to time things flare up and there are deaths caused on both sides purely and simply because of prejudices. Pakistan itself now also has a divide between, let us say, normal Muslims and those fanatics such as ISIS, Taliban, etc. So once again, at the beginning of this, we were talking about religions causing wars, conflicts, and it just goes on and on and on, no matter which side of the fence that you're on. So I shall leave those for now, and I shall go on to the Middle East, which has, as I say, has its own problems within mostly the Muslim community, funnily enough. And we'll go on to those countries next. Before we leave South Asia and Southeast Asia, two countries which are more of a success story should come to mind. One is Malaysia, and the other is the most populous Muslim country in the world, which is Indonesia. Malaysia has three basic ethnic groups, that is Malay, Chinese and Indian, and in the main they get on well together, and there is not a lot of trouble, and it's more of a case of live and let live. There are times, however, that ethnic violence has raised its head, but in the main it is a success story. Indonesia, with the one exception, also has a live and let live policy. In fact, it's enshrined in the constitution that the 5 major religions of the world should each be able to have freedom of worship. The one exception to that is the province of Aceh, which is extreme Muslim and follows the precepts of the Muslim faith and also its laws and customs. There have been times in Indonesia when violence has erupted, but it tends to be mostly against the Chinese peoples, who are quite a large minority there, but it seems to be more along financial lines than actual religious ones. There are quite a large Christian communities dotted within Indonesia, but they only make up a small percentage. In total, maybe about 10%, with 90% Muslims. But as I say, it's mostly live and let live and freedom of worship. Now we are at the Middle East part of the discussion. I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm not 100% sure in my own mind whether this is about religion. I personally think it's more about land, customs, etc. If you talk to any Palestinian, they will say that the land is theirs. If you talk to any Israeli, they will also say that the land is theirs from biblical times. I'm not sure if the fact that the Palestinians are Muslims and the Israelis are Jews comes into it, apart from the historical beginning of Israel after the Second World War. Is there a solution? I don't think there is. The reason I say that is that if you speak to any Palestinian, they will vehemently say that the land is theirs. If you ask them, can they share it with the Israelis, they will say absolutely not. If you ask them what will happen to the Israelis if you have the land, they want to get rid of every single one. Some Israelis believe that there is a possibility of a two-state solution. I don't think any Palestinian will actually agree that there is a two-state solution. So the Israelis basically are taking over all of the land by force. And to me, it just seems to be forcing people into smaller and smaller enclaves. That's the Palestinians. The Gaza Strip, for example, I mean, is horrendous in there in the fact it's so overcrowded, and there is nothing for people there. There is no proper schools, hospitals, and almost all of the economy is by Israelis. So I don't think there's any answer to that. Unfortunately, violence, conflict. We've already had the wars in 67 and 74. Whether there's going to be another one, I don't know. I sincerely hope not, but I cannot say an answer to this question. The next section I would like to discuss is about Saudi Arabia, Yemen and Iran. First, let's take Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a mainly Sunni Islam country, and it has the two holiest cities in all of Islam inside, which gives it a very powerful position in the Islamic and Arab world. It also is extremely powerful because of the oil. However, many of you will not know where the oil is situated. The oil is situated in the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia. And you may ask, why does that matter? Well, I'll tell you why it matters. Most of the eastern side of Saudi Arabia are Shiite Muslims. And this causes conflict because they are virtually treated as second-class citizens. They do not get the advantages of all the oil that is in their area, and consequently it's a war, or certainly violence, waiting to happen. Violence has occurred in the past. Next door to Saudi Arabia and joined by a causeway is Bahrain. Bahrain is ruled by a Sunni Muslim king, but the majority of people there are Shias. This matters because Saudi Arabia will not allow the Shias to take over in the small island of Bahrain. And when there was some trouble some years ago, Saudi Arabia sent its troops across the causeway to defend the existing king. We now have to have a look at the conflict, or the war as it is actually in the Yemen. Saudi Arabia has spent absolute fortunes trying to win a war, and guess who against? It's against Shiite Muslims, the Houthi. The Houthi are now backed, or have always been backed, by Iran. Iran are giving them weapons and money. Saudi Arabia are taking their oil money and American weapons. And basically the two of them have fought each other to a standstill. Is it about religion? I don't know. But all I know is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are at opposite ends of the fence, and they're using the Yemen as a proxy war against each other. Recently, I am informed that there is some communication between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that they may be getting together to talk to each other. It's going to be very difficult for Saudi Arabia because it is the spiritual home of Islam, and it is also ruled over by the Wahhabi sect, which is one of the most, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it is a sect that has absolutely no desire to compromise with any other sect such as the Shiites. The next area that we have to talk about is Afghanistan and partly Pakistan. Afghanistan is ruled by absolute fundamentalist Taliban. They have taken over the country and nobody has any rights unless they are a member of the Taliban. And this applies especially to women. Women and the Taliban, I don't even know why they have women. I suppose just to cook and clean and possibly for sex. I don't know. As a Westerner, I find it unbelievable that you can have that in today's modern era. I suppose the only good thing about the Taliban is that they are fighting ISIS or the Daesh, who are even more fundamentalist. The difference is that they are fundamentalist Sunni, and if you are not Sunni, they'll just kill you at the drop of a hat to establish what they call their caliphate, which has already been destroyed once, but I think will come back. There is more violence in this area than almost anywhere else on the Middle East. Afghanistan has been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and many other countries, including the Russians, the British and others, have tried to take it over and rule it and run it, but it never seems to happen. The Afghans themselves just fight back consistently and so on. In Pakistan at the moment, again, a lot of fundamentalist Muslim sects, but they're controlled by the army and their special branch, which are always telling them what to do and who to go and attack and so on. Again, Pakistan, politically driven, never goes anywhere, but it is a nuclear power, and that's the bit that worries me, the fact that one day they might just release that nuclear power. I'm coming now on to North Africa, where fortunately there's a lot more tolerance, at least religious-wise, if not politically-wise. So if we have a look at sort of Morocco and Tunisia and Egypt, Libya, they all have their own problems, but none as bad as the ones of the Horn of Africa. And I'm talking about Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, etc. It's difficult to say whether these exactly are religious. I suppose they're religious in the fact that they're all Muslim countries. However, for whatever reason, there is war, conflict, violence that goes on and on and on. Sometimes it's for independence, sometimes it is for power, and it's very, very difficult to know exact ways to stop what is going on there. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I think a lot of the things that we've talked about are from a religious point of view, mostly because we have conflicts between Christians and Muslims and Hindus. But a lot of it is not just about religion, it is about power. Who has it, who wants it, who gets it, what do they use, such as oil revenues or gas revenues. It is also a playground, if you like, for the Russians and the Americans to test out their weapons to see what is best in a conflict zone. I'm going to leave this here now because I think there is enough there for a discussion that could go on ad infinitum. I just wanted to get it out of the way because it's something that has been on my mind for quite a few years. So I thank you for watching this. If you liked it, I'd be grateful if you subscribe and like the bell, etc. Thank you very much indeed.